The crack of a gunshot echoed across the wooden docks of Miles City, Montana, as Harriet Price struggled against the iron grip of two burly men dragging her toward the steamboat bound for San Francisco. It was 1883, and the sun cast long shadows over the Missouri River where the SS. River Queen waited, its steam already billowing into the crisp autumn air. "Let me go," Harriet shouted, her honey-colored hair falling loose from its pins as she fought against her captors. "I won't marry him. You can't make me." The taller of the two men, a weathered fellow with a graying beard, tightened his grip on her arm. "Your uncle paid good money to see you safely delivered to your fiancée, Miss Price. A deal's a deal." Harriet's heart hammered in her chest. 3 weeks ago, she'd been teaching at a small schoolhouse in Virginia when her uncle had announced her engagement to a wealthy San Francisco businessman. She'd never met a man 30 years her senior who needed a proper wife to host his business affairs. Her refusal had meant nothing. Her uncle had legal guardianship since her parents' death, despite her 22 years of age. At the end of the dock, Samuel Drake watched the scene unfold from atop his Palomino horse. He'd come to town for supplies, not to witness a kidnapping in broad daylight. The cowboy adjusted his worn Stetson, revealing dark hair and eyes that had seen their share of trouble across the frontier. At 30 years old, Samuel had built a reputation as a man who minded his own business, a quality that had kept him alive through the lawless years following the war. But something about the woman's desperate cries stirred something in him that he thought long buried. "Please," she begged as they dragged her up the gangplank. "Someone help me." The dock workers and townsfolk averted their eyes. A woman's fate wasn't their concern, especially when men with money and guns were involved. Samuel dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby post. His spurs jingled as he approached the steamboat, hand resting casually on the worn grip of his Colt revolver. "Seems to me the lady doesn't want to go," he called out, his voice carrying across the dock. The men stopped, turning to face him. The captain of the River Queen stepped forward, a portly man with a red face and a captain's hat perched atop his balding head. "This is none of your concern, cowboy," the captain said firmly. "We've got a schedule to keep and paying passengers aboard." Samuel walked closer, each step deliberate. "I reckon schedules can wait when someone's being forced against their will," the bearded man holding Harriet scoffed. "She's promised to a man in San Francisco. We're just delivering the goods." Something dangerous flashed in Samuel's eyes. "A woman ain't goods to be delivered." Harriet stared at the stranger, hope blossoming in her chest. His worn denim and leather spoke of a life lived under the open sky, far from the polished society her uncle prized. But it was his eyes, steady and unwavering, that told her he might actually help. "Her uncle signed the papers," the other man said, pulling a folded document from his coat. "It's all legal and proper." Samuel took a step onto the gangplank. "I don't see her signature on those papers." The captain nervously glanced at the gathering crowd. A few more minutes of delay would mean missing the tide. "Look, mister, we don't want trouble." "Then there's no trouble to be had," Samuel replied evenly. "Just let the lady go." The bearded man released Harriet with one hand to reach for his pistol. Before his fingers could close around the grip, Samuel's revolver cleared its holster in a blur, aimed steady between the man's eyes. "I wouldn't," Samuel said quietly. Time seemed to stand still on the docks. Harriet felt the second man's grip loosen slightly as uncertainty spread through him. "This is madness," the captain blustered. The law says a woman can't be forced to marry against her will," came a new voice. Sheriff Thomas Wilson strode down the dock, badge glinting in the sunlight. "At least not in my town." Relief washed over Harriet's face. The sheriff looked at the papers, then at the trembling woman. "Miss, are you going to San Francisco of your own free will?" "No," Harriet said firmly. "I was taken from my home, from my students. I never agreed to any of this." Sheriff Wilson nodded slowly. "Then I reckon there's nothing more to discuss." He turned to the men. "You'll release her now, or you'll spend the night in my jail for attempted kidnapping." The bearded man's face contorted with rage. "Her uncle will hear about this. There'll be consequences." "I'm sure there will be," the sheriff replied evenly. "But not today and not in my jurisdiction." The men released Harriet, and she stumbled forward. Samuel holstered his weapon and stepped forward, steadying her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him with eyes the color of a summer sky. Samuel nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the gratitude shining in her gaze. "Just doing what needed doing, madam." The sheriff turned to Harriet. "Miss, you're welcome to file a complaint at my office. We can send a wire to the authorities in Virginia." Harriet's face fell. "My uncle controls everything back home. There's nowhere for me to go." The steamboat's whistle blew a warning that departure was imminent. The captain looked anxiously at his pocket watch. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town," Samuel said suddenly, surprising himself as much as everyone else. "My sister lives there too. You'd be safe until you figure out your next steps." Harriet studied the cowboy's face, searching for deceit or ill intent, but found only a straightforward offer of help. "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition," he replied. "Can't leave you stranded on these docks." The captain cleared his throat. "And what about her passage?" "It's been paid for all the way to San Francisco." Samuel's gaze hardened. "Consider it a donation to your company, Captain." Sheriff Wilson nodded approvingly. "Drake here's good people, Miss Price. I can vouch for him and his sister." Harriet glanced back at the steamboat, where her would-be captors glared in frustration. Then she looked at the stranger who had risked himself for her. The decision seemed to make itself. "I would be grateful for your hospitality, Mr. Drake," she said formally. Samuel nodded once, then offered his arm in a gesture more gentlemanly than his rugged appearance suggested. "My horse is this way." As they walked away from the docks, the steamboat whistle blew again. The River Queen would leave without its reluctant passenger. "You're taking quite a risk," Harriet said quietly as they reached his palomino. "My uncle isn't someone to cross lightly. He has connections." Samuel helped her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. "Montana's a long way from Virginia, Miss Price. And I've dealt with worse than angry uncles." The horse trotted away from the docks, carrying them past curious onlookers and through the main street of Miles City. Harriet was acutely aware of the stranger's solid presence behind her, his arms reaching around to hold the reins. "I don't even know your full name," she realized aloud. "Samuel Drake," he replied, guiding the horse around a muddy patch in the road. "Most folks just call me Sam. I'm Harriet Price. I suppose I should thank you properly for what you did back there." "No need," he said. No decent man could watch what was happening and just ride away. As they left the town behind, Harriet found herself studying the open landscape stretching before them. Miles of rolling prairie dotted with pine-covered hills spread out in every direction. It was nothing like Virginia's lush greenery, but there was a raw beauty to it that called to something deep inside her. "It's beautiful out here," she murmured. Samuel nodded, though she couldn't see it. "It grows on you." "How far is your ranch?" "About an hour's ride." "The land opens up beyond that next ridge. We run about 200 head of cattle plus some horses." Harriet tried to imagine a life so different from her own. "Your sister lives there too, Rebecca. She's 4 years younger than me. Our parents died in '71 influenza. We've been running the place ever since." Harriet felt a kinship at the mention of lost parents. "Mine died in a ferry accident when I was 16. That's when my uncle became my guardian. Samuel's voice softened slightly. I'm sorry to hear that. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sway of the horse lulling Harriet into a sense of calm she hadn't felt in weeks. The panic and fear that had gripped her on the docks began to recede, replaced by cautious hope. "What will you do now?" Samuel asked finally. Harriet sighed. "I don't know. I was a teacher before all this. Perhaps I could find a position somewhere." Miles City's got a schoolhouse. No teacher at present, though. The possibility kindled excitement in her chest. "Really? You think they might consider me?" Samuel chuckled, the sound rumbling against her back. "Town's desperate for educated folks. I reckon they'd hire you on the spot." As they crested the ridge Samuel had mentioned, Harriet gasped. Below them stretched a valley with a modest but well-maintained ranch house nestled beside a creek, lined with cottonwood trees. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and several horses grazed in a corral near a weathered barn. "Welcome to Broken Spur Ranch," Samuel said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's wonderful," Harriet breathed. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. Her dark hair was braided down her back, and she wore practical riding clothes rather than a dress. "Sam," she called, clearly surprised to see her brother returning with a companion. Samuel dismounted first, then reached up to help Harriet down. Her legs felt wobbly after the long ride, and she stumbled slightly against his chest before regaining her balance. "Sorry," she murmured, flushing with embarrassment. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. "No harm done." Rebecca approached, curiosity evident in her expression. "Didn't expect you back with company." Samuel quickly explained the situation at the docks. Rebecca's face darkened with anger as she heard how Harriet had been treated, but it softened as she turned to the other woman. "You poor thing," she said, taking Harriet's hands in her own. "Of course you'll stay with us." "I've been desperate for female company out here with only this grumpy cowboy for conversation." Harriet laughed despite herself, relief washing over her at the warm welcome. "Thank you. I promise not to be a burden." "Nonsense," Rebecca declared. "Come inside. You must be exhausted and hungry." "Sam, take care of Ranger, would you?" Samuel tipped his hat to Harriet before leading the horse toward the barn. Harriet watched him go, a strange fluttering in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Rebecca noticed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "My brother doesn't usually involve himself in other people's troubles. You must have made quite an impression." Harriet turned away, heat rising in her cheeks. "He was very brave." "He's a good man," Rebecca said simply. "The best I know. Now come, let's get you settled." The ranch house was modest but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and colorful quilts that added warmth to the rooms. Rebecca showed Harriet to a small bedroom with a window overlooking the creek. "This was our parents' room," Rebecca explained, opening a chest at the foot of the bed. "I hope you don't mind wearing some of my things until we can get you proper clothes of your own." "You're being far too kind," Harriet said, tears suddenly pricking her eyes. The events of the day caught up with her all at once: the terror at the docks, the unexpected rescue, and now this generous hospitality from strangers. Rebecca put an arm around her shoulders. "It's what neighbors do out here. The frontier isn't kind to those who go it alone." By the time Samuel returned from the barn, Rebecca had helped Harriet wash up and change into a simple blue dress. They sat at the kitchen table, where Rebecca served a hearty stew that had been simmering all day. Samuel paused in the doorway, struck by the sight of Harriet seated at his family table. With her hair neatly braided and her face relaxed, she looked even more beautiful than she had on the docks. Something tightened in his chest, a feeling he quickly dismissed as he took his seat. "Thank you for the meal," Harriet said as Rebecca ladled stew into bowls. "It smells wonderful." "Wait until you taste it," Samuel said with a smile. "Beck's the best cook in 3 counties." Dinner conversation flowed easily as Rebecca asked about Harriet's life in Virginia and her teaching experience. Harriet found herself relaxing, even laughing at Rebecca's stories about her brother's misadventures on the ranch. "He tried to break that wild Mustang last spring," Rebecca recounted gleefully. "Ended up face first in the mud puddle while that horse pranced around him like he was showing off." Samuel groaned. "She doesn't need to hear all my failures on her first day here." Harriet's eyes twinkled with amusement. "On the contrary, it's quite reassuring to know even cowboys have their moments." After dinner, they sat on the porch as the sun set over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beauty of it caught Harriet's breath. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted. Samuel leaned against the porch railing. "That's Montana for you. Makes a man feel small and significant all at once." Rebecca excused herself to finish some mending, leaving Harriet and Samuel alone on the porch. A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "Thank you," Harriet said finally. "Not just for what you did at the docks, but for bringing me here. I don't know what would have happened otherwise." Samuel's gaze remained on the horizon. "I've seen too many people forced into lives they didn't choose. Couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." Harriet sensed there was more to his words, a history he wasn't sharing. "You mentioned the schoolhouse in town needs a teacher," he nodded. "Town council's been advertising back east for months. No takers yet." "I'd like to apply," she said decisively. "If I'm to stay in Montana, I should make myself useful." Samuel turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "You're considering staying?" "There's nothing for me back in Virginia except an uncle who would sell me to the highest bidder," Harriet replied bitterly. "At least here I might build something of my own." "It's a hard life," he warned. "Winters are brutal. The work never ends." Harriet lifted her chin. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Drake, and I'm not afraid of hard work." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I believe that." After a pause, he added, "I can take you into town tomorrow to speak with Mayor Hollister about the teaching position if you'd like." "I would appreciate that very much." As darkness fell completely, they retired to their rooms. Harriet lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through cottonwood leaves, the occasional howl of a coyote in the hills. For the first time since her uncle had announced her engagement, she felt something like peace. Whatever happened next, she was free to choose her own path. That knowledge was worth all the uncertainty ahead. Morning came with the crow of a rooster and the smell of coffee brewing. Harriet dressed quickly in another borrowed dress from Rebecca and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Samuel already at the table. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy in his presence. He stood when she entered, a courteous gesture she hadn't expected from a cowboy. "Morning. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "Is Rebecca already up as well?" "She rode out at first light to check on a pregnant mare in the north pasture," Samuel explained, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Said to tell you she'll be back by noon." Harriet accepted the coffee gratefully. "You both work so hard," Samuel shrugged. "It's the only way to survive out here." He hesitated before adding, "If you're still set on seeing the mayor today, we should head to town after breakfast. It's market day, so he'll be there for sure." They ate a simple meal of biscuits and bacon before saddling the horses. Rebecca had left a mare for Harriet to ride, a gentle bay named Daisy, who seemed content to carry her new rider. The ride to Miles City took on a different character in the morning light. Harriet noticed details she'd missed the previous day: wildflowers dotting the prairie, hawks circling overhead, the distant silhouettes of deer at the forest edge. "It's so alive," she commented. "I always imagined the frontier as empty space waiting to be filled." Samuel chuckled. "That's what the Easterners like to think. Truth is, this land has its own way been here long before us and will be here long after." As they approached town, Harriet felt a flutter of nerves. "Do you think the townspeople will remember what happened yesterday?" "Folks around here have long memories," Samuel acknowledged, "but they respect someone who stands their ground." The main street was busy with market day activity. Farmers had set up stalls selling produce, and merchants displayed goods brought in by the latest supply wagons. People nodded respectfully to Samuel as they passed, eyeing Harriet with undisguised curiosity. They tied their horses outside the mayor's office, a small building adjacent to the general store. Mayor Hollister was a surprisingly young man with a neatly trimmed beard and wire-rimmed spectacles that gave him a scholarly appearance. "Mr. Drake," he greeted warmly. "Don't often see you in town twice in as many days." Samuel introduced Harriet, carefully explaining her situation without revealing too many personal details. The mayor's interest visibly increased when Samuel mentioned she was a qualified teacher. "Miss Price," the mayor said eagerly, "you're an answer to our prayers. Our last schoolteacher left 6 months ago to get married. The children have been running wild ever since." "I'd be happy to discuss the position," Harriet said, her professional demeanor surfacing naturally. "I have experience with children of all ages and can provide references from Virginia, though they might take some time to arrive." Mayor Hollister waved away her concerns. "If Samuel Drake vouches for you, that's good enough for me. Could you start next Monday?" "That would give us time to notify all the families." Harriet blinked, startled by how quickly things were moving. Yes, I suppose I could." "Excellent." The mayor pulled out paperwork from his desk. "Standard salary is $40 a month, with lodging included above the schoolhouse. It's small but comfortable for a single lady." As they discussed the details, Harriet felt a growing sense of excitement. This was actually happening. She was building a new life, one entirely of her own making. Samuel waited patiently, offering occasional comments but mostly letting Harriet handle her own negotiations. She impressed him with her quiet confidence and clear knowledge of educational matters. By the time they left the mayor's office, Harriet was officially the new schoolteacher of Miles City, set to begin the following week. "I can't quite believe it," she said as they walked toward the general store. "Yesterday I was being forced onto a steamboat, and today I have a position and a purpose." "Life changes fast out here," Samuel replied, "for better or worse." At the general store, Harriet selected fabrics for new dresses and essential supplies for her teaching and living quarters. When she reached for her reticule to pay, she realized with horror that she had nothing. Her money and possessions were all still on the River Queen, heading to San Francisco. "I have no way to pay for any of this," she admitted, mortified. Samuel stepped forward. "Put it on my account, Tom," he told the storekeeper. "Miss Price will settle up after she receives her first month's wages." The storekeeper nodded, wrapping their purchases. "Of course, Mr. Drake." Outside, Harriet turned to Samuel, distress evident on her face. "I can't keep accepting your charity. I've imposed enough already." "It's not charity," he said firmly. "It's an investment in our new schoolteacher. Besides, you'll pay it back soon enough." Before she could argue further, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, and raised voices carried across the distance. "Wait here," Samuel instructed, handing her the packages before striding toward the disturbance. Harriet hesitated only briefly before following, staying a few paces behind. As they approached, she recognized one of the voices, the bearded man who had tried to force her onto the steamboat. "I'm telling you, Sheriff, she's legally bound to come with us." The man insisted. "The boat had mechanical troubles downriver and had to return. We have papers signed by her guardian." Sheriff Wilson noticed Samuel approaching and gave him a warning look. "Mr. Jensen here claims Miss Price is still obligated to travel to San Francisco." Samuel's expression darkened. "Miss Price is a grown woman who's made her choice. She's also the town's new school teacher." The bearded man Jensen spun around, his face contorting with rage when he spotted Harriet. "There she is, the little runaway." "I'm not running away from anything," Harriet said, stepping forward despite her fear. "I'm choosing my own path." Jensen pulled out the same papers he'd shown on the docks. "Your uncle signed a binding contract. Your promise to Mr. Whitcomb in San Francisco. He paid good money for you." Several townswomen gasped at the crude phrasing. "No man can buy another person in this country," Sheriff Wilson said sternly. "Not since the war ended." "It's a marriage contract," Jensen insisted. "Perfectly legal." The mayor, who had followed the commotion from his office, stepped forward. "Actually, sir, without the lady's signature, such a contract holds no legal weight in Montana territory. Our territorial legislature passed specific laws about this 3 years ago." Jensen's face reddened further. "This is outrageous. Her uncle will hear about this." "I expect he will," the sheriff agreed mildly. "Now, unless you have other business in Miles City, I suggest you rejoin your boat. I believe the captain was eager to resume his journey." The gathered townsfolk closed ranks slightly, their posture making it clear which side they supported. Jensen looked around, realizing he was outnumbered and outmatched. "This isn't over," he threatened, glaring at Harriet. "Mr. Whitcomb doesn't take kindly to broken contracts." "Neither do I," Samuel said quietly, his hand resting near his holster. Jensen backed down, muttering curses as he stomped back toward the docks. His companion followed silently, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked Harriet once they'd gone. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I didn't expect them to come back." Sheriff Wilson approached them. "I'll make sure they leave on that boat, Miss Price. But you should know men like that don't give up easily, especially when money's involved." "She'll be safe at the ranch until she moves into the schoolhouse," Samuel assured him. The mayor cleared his throat. "About that, perhaps it would be prudent for Miss Price to delay moving into the schoolhouse alone until we're certain these men have truly departed the territory. The school building is rather isolated at night." Harriet felt a flash of frustration at having her independence threatened so quickly, but she recognized the wisdom in the suggestion. "How long do you think that might be?" "Give it a few weeks," the sheriff advised. "I'll send wires to sheriffs downriver to confirm they've moved on." Samuel turned to Harriet. "You're welcome at Broken Spur as long as needed. Rebecca would be delighted." The sincere offer touched her deeply. "Thank you. It seems I continue to impose on your kindness." "Not at all," he replied, his voice softening. "It's the neighborly thing to do." As they rode back to the ranch with their purchases, Harriet's mind whirled with the day's developments. "It all seems to be happening so quickly," she admitted. "Yesterday I thought my life was over, and today I'm a school teacher with my own salary." Samuel glanced at her, sunlight catching the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "Do you regret it, standing up for yourself?" "Not for a moment," she said firmly. "I just hope I don't bring trouble to you and your sister, or to the town." "Trouble has a way of finding folks out here regardless," he replied philosophically. "At least this trouble is for a worthy cause." Rebecca was delighted by the news of Harriet's teaching position and immediately set about helping her prepare. The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. During the day, Harriet would help Rebecca with household chores while Samuel worked with the cattle and horses. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, sharing stories as the sun set over the Montana landscape. Harriet learned that Samuel had fought briefly in the final year of the Civil War, though he spoke little of that time. After their parents' deaths, he and Rebecca had struggled to keep the ranch going, facing rustlers, harsh winters, and drought with equal determination. "You've had a hard life," she observed one evening as they sat alone on the porch. Rebecca had retired early with a headache. Samuel looked out at the darkening land that was his home. "Hard, maybe, but good in its way. There's something to be said for building something with your own hands, making your own choices." "I'm beginning to understand that," Harriet said softly. Their eyes met in the fading light, and something shifted between them, a recognition of shared values despite their different backgrounds. Samuel cleared his throat and looked away first. "You'll make a fine teacher," he said. "The children here need someone who understands the value of choosing their own path." 4 days before Harriet was set to begin teaching, Rebecca organized a small gathering at the ranch. Several neighboring families came to meet the new schoolteacher, bringing dishes to share and curious children who eyed Harriet with undisguised interest. "Miss Price, is it true you escaped from pirates?" asked a freckle-faced boy of about 10. Harriet laughed. "Not pirates, Timothy. Just men who didn't respect my right to choose my own future." "Mr. Drake saved you though, right?" piped up a younger girl. "Like in the storybooks." Samuel, overhearing as he passed with a tray of cups, gave Harriet an apologetic look. "Town gossip travels faster than wildfire." The children's mother hushed them, but Harriet smiled warmly. "Yes, Mr. Drake did help me. It's important to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." As the afternoon progressed, Harriet found herself increasingly at ease with her new neighbors. These people were straightforward and hardworking, judging her on her own merits rather than family connections or social standing. It was refreshingly different from Virginia society. She noticed Samuel watching her from across the yard as she charmed the reluctant teenage boys into discussing their interests in school. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod of approval that warmed her more than it should have. That evening, after the guests had departed, the three of them sat on the porch as usual. Rebecca yawned dramatically after only a few minutes. "I think I'll turn in early," she announced. "All that socializing has worn me out completely." Harriet knew perfectly well that Rebecca was rarely tired this early, but she said nothing as the younger woman disappeared inside with a suspiciously innocent smile. "Your sister isn't very subtle," Harriet commented once they were alone. Samuel chuckled. "Never has been. Sorry about that." "Don't be." Harriet gathered her courage. "I've enjoyed our evenings talking. So have I." His voice was low, almost reluctant in its honesty. Silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken feelings. Harriet studied his profile in the fading light, the strong jaw, the slight crinkles around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun. "Tell me something true," she said suddenly. Samuel looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean? Something real? Something you believe in?" He considered her request seriously. "I believe a person's word should mean something. That land worked honestly belongs to the one who works it. That everyone deserves the chance to build their own life without someone else dictating its course." His answer touched something deep inside her. "Those are good things to believe in." "Your turn," he said. "Something true." Harriet looked out at the darkening prairie. I believe that sometimes what seems like the worst day of your life can actually be the beginning of something better. I believe that courage isn't about not being afraid, but about doing what's right despite your fear." She paused before adding quietly, "And I believe I was meant to come to Montana, even if the way it happened was frightening." Samuel's hand found hers on the porch railing, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I'm glad you're here, Harriet." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her. "So am I, Samuel." They sat together until the stars emerged in full force, neither feeling the need to fill the silence with words. When they finally said good night, Samuel's hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. Harriet fell asleep that night with a smile on her face, dreams filled with prairie skies and a certain cowboy's gentle gaze. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Sheriff Wilson rode out to the ranch just after breakfast, his expression grim as Samuel met him in the yard. "What is it, Tom?" Samuel asked, immediately alert to his friend's tension. "Got a wire from downriver," the sheriff said, glancing toward the house where Harriet and Rebecca were washing the breakfast dishes. "That Jensen fellow and his partner never got back on the River Queen. They hired horses in Fort Benton and were seen heading north." Samuel's jaw tightened. "They're coming back. Looks that way. And there's more. They've got 3 hired guns with them, professional troublemakers from Billings." Rebecca appeared in the doorway, Harriet just behind her. "What's happened?" The sheriff explained the situation while Harriet's face grew pale. "This is my fault," she said. "I've brought this danger to your home." "Nonsense," Rebecca declared. "You didn't ask those men to harass you." Samuel turned to the sheriff. "What's your plan, Tom?" "I've deputized the Johnson brothers and old Pete Wilson," the sheriff replied. "We'll meet them before they reach town if we can, but if they slip past us—" He left the implication hanging. Samuel nodded grimly. "We'll be ready here. When do you expect them?" "Tomorrow, maybe the day after." They had a 2-day head start before I got the wire. After the sheriff departed, Samuel began preparing the ranch for potential trouble. He showed Harriet how to use a shotgun just in case. He insisted and moved the horses to the back pasture, where they'd be less visible from the main road. That night, tension filled the ranch house. Rebecca tried to maintain normalcy by teaching Harriet to make her famous apple pie, but the laughter felt forced, the conversation strained by unspoken worries. After Rebecca went to bed, Harriet found Samuel on the porch, his rifle across his knees as he watched the moonlit landscape. "You should get some rest," he said without turning. "Tomorrow might be a long day." Instead of leaving, Harriet sat beside him. "I can't sleep knowing I've put you and Rebecca in danger." Samuel turned to her, his expression softening. "Harriet, this isn't your doing. Those men made their choices." "But if I hadn't been here, if you hadn't been here, those men would be forcing some other woman into a life she didn't choose," he interrupted firmly. "And I'd be sitting on this porch alone, not knowing what I was missing." The rawness in his voice caught her by surprise. "What were you missing?" Samuel set the rifle aside and took her hands in his. "A chance to know someone who makes me see the world differently, someone brave enough to start over with nothing but her wits and determination." Harriet's heart thundered in her chest. "Samuel." "I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "We barely know each other, but I need you to understand that whatever happens tomorrow, I don't regret helping you that day at the docks. Not for a second." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I don't regret it either." In the silvery moonlight, Samuel leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a gentle kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities. Harriet responded with a sureness that surprised them both, her hands moving to rest against his chest. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more honest than any words they could have spoken. When they finally broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I should be keeping watch," he murmured. "I'll stay with you," she replied. "Just for a while." They sat together in the darkness, hands intertwined, the threat of tomorrow temporarily overshadowed by the certainty of what was growing between them. Dawn broke with a stillness that seemed to hold its breath. Samuel had convinced Harriet to get a few hours' sleep, but she rose early, determined to face whatever came alongside him and Rebecca. After a tense breakfast, Samuel took his position near the barn where he had a clear view of the approach to the ranch. Rebecca and Harriet remained in the house, the shotgun close at hand. "He's good at this," Rebecca assured Harriet as they peered out the window. "Was a scout during the war, has instincts like nobody I've ever known." The morning stretched endlessly, each distant sound causing them to tense. By noon, there was still no sign of riders approaching. "Maybe the sheriff caught up with them," Harriet suggested hopefully. Rebecca nodded, though her expression remained watchful. "Maybe." Shortly after midday, Samuel spotted a plume of dust on the horizon. He signaled to the house with a short whistle, the warning they'd agreed upon. "Get away from the windows," Rebecca instructed, moving to retrieve the shotgun. Harriet's heart raced, but her hands remained steady. The fear she felt was different from the helpless terror she'd experienced on the docks. This time, she wasn't alone, and she wasn't defenseless. Samuel positioned himself at the corner of the barn, rifle ready but not raised. As the riders approached, he counted 5 men, Jensen and his partner, plus 3 rough-looking strangers with the hard eyes of men who killed for money. They stopped at the edge of the yard, fanning out in a way that spoke of practiced intimidation. "Drake," Jensen called. "We know you're harboring the Price woman. Send her out and we'll leave peacefully." Samuel stepped into view, rifle held casually but ready. "I think you boys took a wrong turn. Nothing for you here." Jensen sneered. "Don't play games. We have a legal claim to escort Miss Price to San Francisco, and we intend to fulfill our contract." "Your contract isn't worth the paper it's written on," Samuel replied evenly. "The lady has made her choice. She's staying in Montana." One of the hired guns spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. "5 of us, 1 of you. Bad odds, Cowboy." "I count differently," came a new voice. Sheriff Wilson rode into the yard from the east, flanked by 3 armed deputies. They had circled around while Jensen's group was focused on Samuel. "Drop your weapons," the sheriff ordered. "You're trespassing on private property and threatening its residents. That's enough to earn you a stay in my jail." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Jensen's face twisted with rage as he realized he was outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Mr. Whitcomb wants his bride, and he's willing to spend whatever it takes to get her." "Then he's wasting his money," Samuel said coldly. "Miss Price isn't for sale." One of the hired guns, younger and more impulsive than the others, suddenly drew his pistol. Before he could aim, Samuel's rifle cracked, and the man's shoulder erupted in a spray of blood. He tumbled from his saddle with a howl of pain. "Anyone else feeling lucky?" the sheriff asked conversationally, his own weapon trained steadily on Jensen. The fight went out of the group. The other hired guns slowly raised their hands, clearly unwilling to die for Jensen's cause. "You can't stop us all," Jensen said, even as he raised his hands in surrender. "Whitcomb will send more men." "Maybe," Sheriff Wilson acknowledged. "But by then, there'll be wanted posters with your faces on them all over the territory. How much is this job worth to you boys when it means you can't show your faces in any decent town?" The sheriff's deputies moved in to disarm the men while the wounded hired gun moaned in the dirt. As they were being secured, the front door of the ranch house opened. Harriet stepped onto the porch, Rebecca beside her with the shotgun still in her hands. She walked steadily across the yard to stand beside Samuel. "Mr. Jensen," she said clearly, "please tell my uncle and Mr. Whitcomb that I am establishing a new life here as a teacher. I have no intention of ever traveling to San Francisco or honoring any arrangement made without my consent." Jensen glared at her with undisguised hatred. "You'll regret this, girl." "The only thing I regret," Harriet replied evenly, "is not standing up for myself sooner." As the sheriff and his deputies led the prisoners away, with the wounded man slung over his horse, a palpable relief washed over the ranch. Samuel placed a protective arm around Harriet's shoulders and she leaned into his strength. "It's over," he murmured. Rebecca approached them, setting the shotgun against the porch railing. "Not quite," she said with a small smile. "I believe you two have some things to discuss." Samuel's ears reddened as his sister walked back into the house, leaving them alone in the yard. "She's right," he said after a moment. "There are things I want to say to you, Harriet, things I've been feeling." Harriet turned to face him fully. "Then say them." "I know it's only been a little more than a week," he began, suddenly uncertain. "And maybe this is foolish, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. When I saw you on that dock fighting against men who wanted to take your choices away, something changed in me." Harriet's eyes softened. "It changed for me too." Samuel took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm not a wealthy man. All I have is this ranch and the life I've built here. But if you wanted to share it, not right away, but someday, I'd consider myself the luckiest man in Montana territory." Tears welled in Harriet's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Samuel Drake, are you asking to court me properly?" A smile broke across his face. "I reckon I am, Miss Price. With your permission, of course." Instead of answering with words, Harriet rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was a promise of new beginnings, of choices freely made, of a love born in the most unexpected circumstances. When they finally separated, Samuel's eyes were bright with emotion. "I'll take that as a yes." "A definite yes," she confirmed with a radiant smile. The following Monday, Harriet Price began her duties as the schoolteacher of Miles City. The children adored her immediately, responding to her genuine enthusiasm and creative teaching methods. Parents who had worried about entrusting their children's education to an Easterner quickly became her strongest supporters. Samuel would ride into town every Friday afternoon to escort her back to the ranch for the weekend. Their courtship unfolded in full view of the community, who watched with approving eyes as the reserved cowboy and the spirited teacher fell deeper in love with each passing day. Sheriff Wilson received word that Jensen and his companions had been released after serving 30 days in jail, but had immediately left the territory. 2 months later, a letter arrived from Harriet's uncle, grudgingly acknowledging her new position and washing his hands of any further responsibility for her. Mr. Whitcomb, it seemed, had found another prospective bride more amenable to his arrangements. As winter settled over Montana, Harriet moved into the small apartment above the schoolhouse during the week, but continued to spend weekends at Broken Spur. She and Rebecca became as close as sisters, working side by side on household projects while Samuel tended the ranch. On Christmas Eve, with snow blanketing the landscape and a fire crackling in the hearth, Samuel asked Harriet to become his wife. With happy tears in her eyes, she accepted without hesitation. They were married in the spring of 1884, with wildflowers dotting the prairie and the promise of new life all around them. The entire town turned out for the celebration, delighted to see two people who so clearly belonged together pledge their lives to one another. "I never imagined this," Harriet whispered as they danced at their wedding celebration. "When I was being forced onto that boat, I thought my life was ending." Samuel held her close, his heart full to bursting with love for this remarkable woman. Instead, it was just beginning. "Our beginning," she corrected, rising to kiss him as their friends and neighbors cheered. In the years that followed, Harriet continued teaching while also helping Samuel expand the ranch. They welcomed their first child, a son named James, the following year, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years later. When Harriet's former students wrote to her years later, asking what had become of their beloved teacher, she would smile as she penned her reply. "I found my home and my heart on the Montana frontier, all because a steamboat was stopped before it left." And on summer evenings, long after their children had grown and had children of their own, Samuel and Harriet Drake would still sit together on the porch of Broken Spur Ranch, hands intertwined as they watched the sun set over the land. They loved, a testament to choices bravely made, and a love that had begun with one man's refusal to stand by while a woman's freedom was stolen away. "No regrets?" Samuel would sometimes ask, though he already knew the answer, and Harriet would smile, the years having only deepened her love for the cowboy who had changed her life that day on the docks. "Not a single one,"